The email arrived at exactly 7:03 a.m. on a grey, rain-soaked Monday, long before Nora Blake had finished reheating her bland egg white breakfast in the office microwave. The subject line sparkled with forced cheer, "Let's look our best, Team Sparkles." Emojis included, of course. That was Angela Moore's signature touch, HR manager, 31 years old, perfectly styled hair, and an obsession with control disguised as positivity. The message itself was cold beneath the glitter. Effective immediately, all employees were expected to comply with revised dress code standards outlined in Section 14B of the updated HR Handbook. Failure to maintain a professional appearance, particularly involving fabric choices that deviated from traditional weaves, could result in disciplinary action. Nora read the email twice, jaw tightening, as she stood in her corner cubicle near the copy room. The overhead fluorescent light flickered endlessly, giving the space the uncomfortable feel of a low-budget interrogation room. She didn't need to ask who the email was meant for. No one else in the compliance department wore tailored charcoal wool trousers. Everyone else showed up in wrinkled khakis, or cheap skirts ordered online in bulk. Nora dressed with intention, quietly professional, deliberate, precise. And that alone had made her a problem. Angela had resented her ever since discovering that Nora's salary sat dangerously close to her own. Paige Reynolds, Angela's ever-loyal assistant, once joked that Nora dressed like she belonged in an old federal crime drama. Laughter had rippled through the hallway that day. Nora hadn't reacted. She never did. That was her advantage. She didn't argue. She didn't perform. She simply worked. By mid-morning, Nora had already reviewed 3 Department of Defense contract clauses, cross-checked clearance timelines, and verified every data classification tag before submitting the files into the internal system. It was invisible labor, thankless and unnoticed, but absolutely essential. Most people in the building didn't even know what CUI stood for. Nora did. She had earned that knowledge through months of vetting that included interviews, background checks, and an unannounced home inspection by 2 silent men in government-issued coats. The reward sat hidden inside her purse, a slim black clearance badge embedded with a security chip few civilians ever received. She had told no one. By mid-morning, the office had settled into its usual artificial rhythm, the hum of printers, the clatter of keyboards, and the low murmur of conversations that pretended to be about work. Nora Blake remained focused on her screen, fingers moving steadily, as she cross-referenced compliance tables and security annotations. She didn't rush. Precision mattered more than speed. At 10:17 a.m., the rhythm shifted. Angela Moore's heels announced her presence before her voice did, sharp clicks echoing down the hallway like a countdown. The air filled with citrus perfume and practiced confidence. Nora felt it before she saw it, the familiar tightening that came when authority masqueraded as friendliness. Angela stopped beside Nora's cubicle and leaned casually against the partition. "Oh hey, Nora," she said, stretching the name as if it needed explanation. "I just wanted to check in. You had a chance to read the updated attire policy, right?" Nora didn't look up. "I did," she replied calmly. "Nothing in it applied to me." Angela's smile faltered for half a second, then recovered. Right on cue, Paige Reynolds appeared, clutching her clipboard like a security blanket. "It's not personal," Paige chirped. "We are just trying to create a more unified aesthetic. Some older styles can send mixed messages." Nora finally raised her eyes. "Mixed messages to whom?" Angela smirked. "We just want to make sure everyone understands where the line is." "I don't cross lines," Nora said evenly. "I write them." Section 16A of the Federal Compliance Brief overrides internal HR memos. Angela's jaw tightened. She hadn't expected that response. She nodded stiffly, muttered something about consistency, and turned away. Paige followed, whispering into Angela's ear. Their laughter drifted down the hall, sharp and unnecessary. Nora returned to her work, but the air around her felt different, charged. She recognized the feeling. It was the warning sign she'd learned to trust, the subtle shift that preceded retaliation. She'd felt it years earlier, when her promotion paperwork mysteriously vanished. When she trained a junior analyst who later became her supervisor. This was the same pattern. The email from earlier hadn't been policy enforcement. It had been provocation. Nora glanced toward her purse resting beneath the desk. Inside, the clearance badge remained silent and unseen, tucked between mundane objects that masked its importance. She had earned it by staying invisible, by understanding that real authority never announced itself. But someone was trying to make her visible. The accusation arrived without warning, wrapped in politeness, and delivered with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. By early afternoon, Elena Ward had barely left her chair. Her screen glowed with layered spreadsheets and security classifications, as she finalized a compliance summary tied to a sensitive government contract. She was halfway through annotating a risk assessment, when a shadow crossed her desk. "Do you have a moment?" Miranda Cole asked, already stepping into Elena's space. Elena saved her work and folded her hands. "If it's brief." Miranda gestured toward the coffee station. "Let's talk somewhere more casual." Casual was never casual. They stopped near the counter, where the hum of machines provided just enough cover for quiet intimidation. Holly Finch lingered nearby, pretending to refill her mug while listening closely. Miranda tilted her head. "We've received a concern." Elena waited. "There's been some discomfort," Miranda continued. "About your attire. Specifically, the fabric choice. It's been described as unprofessional." Elena glanced down at her tailored grey trousers. "By whom?" "That isn't important," Miranda said quickly. "What matters is perception." "Perception isn't policy," Elena replied. "And policy is your job." Miranda's smile hardened. "We are trying to avoid escalation." Elena nodded slowly. "Escalation requires a violation." "Quote it." Silence stretched between them. The espresso machine hissed loudly, filling the gap Miranda couldn't. "This isn't about the handbook," Miranda snapped. "It's about fit. Culture. Knowing your place." The words landed exactly as intended. Elena met her gaze. "My place is defined by my clearance level and my performance. Both exceed yours." Holly sucked in a sharp breath. Miranda straightened. "That's inappropriate." "So is targeting an employee without cause," Elena said evenly. "If this conversation continues, I'll need it documented." Miranda's eyes flashed. "You're being difficult." "I'm being accurate." People nearby had gone quiet. Someone pretended to read a notice board. Another stared too hard at their phone. Miranda leaned in. "You should be careful," she whispered. "Careers end quietly here." Elena didn't flinch. She reached for her coffee and took a slow sip. "So do departments." Miranda stepped back, shaken. She turned sharply and walked away, heels striking the floor with more force than necessary. Holly hurried after her. Elena returned to her desk, pulse steady. The threat had been delivered. The line had been crossed. The calendar invite arrived at 3:42 p.m., flagged urgent and marked mandatory. No agenda. No explanation. Just a sterile subject line, discussion conference room B. Elena Ward stared at the screen for a long moment before accepting. She had seen this tactic before. Sudden meetings were designed to unbalance, to strip people of preparation and power. But fear required uncertainty, and she had none. Conference room B sat at the far end of the floor, enclosed by glass walls that offered visibility without privacy. When Elena entered, Miranda Cole was already seated at the head of the table, posture stiff, hands folded as if rehearsed. Holly Finch sat beside her with a folder clutched tightly to her chest. At the opposite end, Thomas Reed, a senior operations manager, avoided eye contact entirely. "Have a seat," Miranda said, not bothering to look up. Elena remained standing. "Before we begin, I'd like this meeting recorded." Miranda frowned. "That won't be necessary." "It will," Elena replied calmly. "Given the nature of our earlier conversation." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Let's just get through this," he muttered. Miranda opened the folder. "This is a formal notice regarding repeated concerns about professionalism and workplace alignment." Elena waited. Despite prior communication, Miranda continued, "You've demonstrated resistance to corrective feedback. As a result, we've decided to move forward with termination effective immediately." Holly slid a document across the table. The words "final notice" glared up from the page. Elena didn't touch it. "On what grounds?" she asked. Miranda's voice sharpened. "Cultural incompatibility." "That isn't a legal cause," Elena said. "Especially not for someone assigned to federal compliance." Thomas cleared his throat. "This came from higher up." "Name them," Elena said. Silence filled the room. The glass walls felt tighter now, eyes passing by but never stopping. Miranda exhaled sharply. "You're no longer an asset here." Elena finally sat, crossing her legs with deliberate calm. "Then this conversation is over. I'll require a copy of all documentation related to my clearance assignments." Miranda stiffened. "You don't have clearance authority." "I don't need yours," Elena said. "Mine doesn't expire with employment." Holly's face drained of color. Elena stood, adjusting her jacket. "You'll hear from the appropriate office shortly." Miranda scoffed. "You're bluffing." Elena paused at the door and looked back. "You should hope so." She left the room without collecting the papers, without raising her voice, and without a single doubt. The office doors opened just after 9 a.m. the following morning, and the energy on the floor changed instantly. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Keyboards went silent. Even the printers seemed to hesitate, as if sensing what everyone else did, that something irreversible had just entered the building. Two men stepped inside. They wore dark suits without logos, their movements controlled and purposeful. No badges were visible, but their presence carried weight far heavier than identification. The receptionist froze as they approached, her practiced smile dissolving into uncertainty. "We are here to see human resources," the taller man said calmly. Word traveled fast. By the time Miranda Cole emerged from her office, heels clicking with forced confidence, half the department had already leaned subtly into the hallway. Holly Finch followed close behind, her clipboard pressed to her chest like armor. "I'm Miranda Cole," she said sharply. "How can I help you?" The shorter man handed over a sealed envelope. "We'll need a private room." "Immediately." Miranda hesitated for half a second too long. Then she nodded. "Conference room A." Inside the room, the air felt heavier. The men took their seats without invitation. "We are conducting a compliance review," the taller man said. "Effective immediately." Miranda laughed nervously. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't." Outside the glass walls, whispers spread like static. Down in the lobby, Elena Ward sat quietly near the elevators, a cardboard box resting beside her chair. Inside were the remnants of a career she'd already outgrown, files, a mug, a framed certification she no longer needed. She checked her watch, calm and unhurried. Right on time. Upstairs, voices rose. "Who authorized this?" Miranda snapped. Your records did, the shorter man replied. Including the termination of a federally cleared compliance officer. The color drained from Miranda's face. That employee is no longer with us, she said quickly. That's irrelevant, the man answered. Clearance obligations don't end with employment. Interference escalates penalties. Holly sank into a chair, hands shaking. The door opened. Miranda stepped into the hallway, eyes scanning desperately. That was when she saw Elena below, sitting calmly, speaking with building security. For the first time, Miranda understood. This wasn't retaliation. It was oversight. Panic spread through the office like a slow-moving storm. What had begun as quiet authority turned into visible chaos within minutes. Managers whispered behind closed doors. Phones rang unanswered. People who once spoke confidently now avoided eye contact altogether. Inside conference room A, Miranda Cole sat rigid in her chair, hands clenched so tightly her knuckles burned. Across the table, the two men moved methodically through documents, their expressions unreadable. Every page they turned seemed to drain more color from her face. This is internal, Miranda insisted. You don't have jurisdiction here. The taller man didn't look up. Your company accepted federal contracts. That granted us jurisdiction. Thomas Reed stood near the wall, sweat beading at his temples. We followed procedure, he said weakly. HR handled it. HR violated it, the man replied. By terminating a cleared compliance officer without disclosure or authorization. Holly's breath came shallow and fast. We didn't know, she whispered. Not knowing doesn't negate responsibility, the shorter man said, sliding a document across the table. It increases it. Downstairs, Elena Ward remained seated in the lobby, watching the elevator numbers climb and fall. Building security hovered nearby, unsure whether to escort her out or offer her a chair. She gave them a polite nod, calm as ever. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened. The taller agent stepped out and approached her. Ms. Ward, he said quietly. We'll need you upstairs. Elena stood, smoothing her jacket. The box remained on the floor. In the hallway, Miranda heard the footsteps before she saw her. Elena entered conference room A without hesitation. Miranda's voice cracked. You planned this. Elena met her gaze evenly. I documented it. The agent gestured toward the table. Ms. Ward has complied with all clearance obligations. You have not. Thomas sank into a chair. Miranda stood abruptly. This is a misunderstanding. Elena shook her head. It was a decision. Silence filled the room as the weight of that truth settled. You joked about consequences, Elena continued softly. You assumed ignorance. You underestimated oversight. Miranda's shoulders sagged. The taller agent closed the folder. HR operations are suspended pending review. Executive leadership has been notified. Holly began to cry. Elena picked up her box from the doorway. I believe that concludes my exit interview. The rain had stopped by the time Elena Ward stepped outside the building. The glass tower behind her reflected a sky finally clearing, the clouds breaking apart, as if the storm had been waiting for permission to end. She paused on the steps, breathing in air that felt lighter than it had in years. Inside, the company unraveled. By the end of the week, Miranda Cole had been placed on administrative leave pending a full compliance investigation. Thomas Reed resigned quietly, his name removed from internal directories overnight. HR operations were frozen, and federal auditors occupied the very conference rooms once used to silence dissent. The culture that had thrived on intimidation collapsed under documentation and accountability. Elena watched none of it. She didn't need to. 2 days later, a black sedan waited outside her apartment. The driver said nothing as she climbed in. The ride was smooth, deliberate. At a secure office across town, she met the same two men, this time without tension. "You handled the situation properly," the taller agent said, sliding a folder across the table. "You remained compliant under pressure. That matters." Inside the folder was an offer. Not a promotion. A transition. The role came with fewer meetings, more authority, and absolute autonomy. Oversight without visibility. Influence without exposure. Exactly where Elena worked best. "I accept," she said simply. Months later, she passed the old building once while walking to lunch. The logo had changed. So had the people. The windows looked smaller now, less imposing than she remembered. Power, she had learned, was never loud. It didn't threaten. It didn't posture. It waited. Elena adjusted her coat and continued down the street, phone buzzing with encrypted notifications only a few people in the city could receive. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered. They thought control came from titles and jokes whispered in other languages. They were wrong. Control came from knowing exactly when to stay silent, and when to let the system speak for you.